Israel, Palestine, Jews, Muslims, anti-Semitism, war. What is going on here? The whole world, what a mess. Hi, I'm Danny. I'm an Israeli. I'm a Jew. I live here in Israel. And why am I making this video? There's so much information shared online. It's not clear who to listen to. It's not clear who's speaking the truth or what's fake news. You don't even know who to listen to. Any person, anywhere, just makes up any theory they want. They say they have facts to base it on. They start telling these stories, sharing them everywhere, cutting them into 30-second clips, putting them on TikTok. People sharing it all over the place, and the world is full of false information that is so dangerous to everyone, no matter who you are. So that's why I thought maybe I should also tell the story and share the information. I just want to say that I'm not an expert on making short TikTok clips. I'm not an expert video editor. But I grew up here in Israel almost 50 years. My grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. My father built this country, and I'm here continuing his legacy. And I just want to say the purpose of this video is to really ask questions, offer solutions, and just open up and try to see how we can all people in the world, find that place of balance where we can all share a place and live happily, be satisfied, not lacking anything. This is the whole purpose, the whole intention, is to see how we can all live here together. That's the reason I'm making this. Since this is such a long story with so much history, it might seem that at certain times I'm justifying one nation and condemning the other, or taking the favor of this part and that part. In order to unfold the story, it might start that I'm trying to justify Israel and the Jews and condemning the Islam, but later on it also changed. And the main part in the video is in the end, when I start spilling out the answers to all the questions we're going to be asking about. But just please remember these intentions, because every sentence I'm going to say here, you could make another hour-long YouTube video on it, just trying to prove it and explain it. And I'm not trying to lie. I'm not trying to take one side. This is really my attempt to do it for the benefit of everyone. Also, the internet works in a way that if you start by taking someone's side, it's going to keep showing you only one side of the story, and you'll never know or get exposed to the other side. If you're judging a certain nation or a certain side, so try and be a good judge and hear all sides of the story before you make your decision. So let's start from looking at this picture. As you see, the camera lens is showing you a very specific part of the picture. It looks like one side is stabbing another. If you zoom out, you see the exact opposite picture. Obviously, this is just a drawing, but it's kind of what's happening right now, and I'd like to share the story. So first of all, there are a lot of claims that Israel is an apartheid state. It is a 100% lie. There are Arab doctors that work in the best medical institutions in Israel. Here's a list, for example. So I clicked in Google, best doctors at Hadassah Ein Kerem. It's a hospital next to Jerusalem. You can go to this website to see that I didn't make this up. The first one who came up, Dr. Bilal Kefia, is Arab. David Luria is Jewish, obviously. Mahdi El-Hajj, an Arab doctor, a surgeon. Yoram is Israeli, Ronen is Israeli, Benny, Israeli, I mean Jewish. Majdi, an Arab doctor. There's an Arab Muslim in the Israeli Supreme Court. Every street sign in Israel has Hebrew, Arabic, and English on it. There are Muslims, Arab Muslims, that are part of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And it's the defense force, it's not the attacking force. And they serve just with us as brothers, the Jews, and together we protect this country. Here's a picture of a Jewish soldier praying next to his Muslim brother soldier that they're in the same unit defending this country together. As you can see, it happens several times. And here's another picture of a Jew and Muslim working in the same ambulance together, praying and respecting each other. So here's one example how the media is showing you complete falsehood, just lies about Israel. There is no apartheid here whatsoever. Every Arab Muslim can vote and can practice their religion freely here.
Syria.
This is Israel. There is no apartheid. Do you see Jews like this in Syria?
Hijab. Where Israel? This is hijab. Israel, not hijab.
Yes, this is Israel. I can show you. This is Tel Aviv. This is Tel Aviv. Okay, this is Jaffa. You see there? This is Jaffa. I will show you okay, this is the Muslim people celebrating on the beach of Tel Aviv. And this is the helicopter of the IDF there. And this is, you see, this is Tel Aviv. And you see, we have signs in Arabic. You see, this is signs in Arabic.
If you still don't believe me, get on a plane, come here, contact me. I'd love to show you around and show you how it's just all nonsense. There's another rumor going around that Israel aren't sending aid trucks into Gaza to help the Gazans. So that's a complete lie too. We send tons of food and aid into Gaza. Here's a clip of an aid truck coming in and the citizens of Gaza approaching the truck to get food, and in the end they're clapping and cheering for the Israeli soldiers guarding them. Because usually what happens is the Hamas terrorists come and steal the food and steal the trucks from the Gazan population.
Hello and welcome to Is Israel Starving Gaza, the game show. Right now we're actually in Gaza at the Israel border, and behind me are hundreds of aid trucks. 4,000 get in a week, so you do the math. Is Israel starving Gaza? The answer is, I'll wait for you to decide.
There was also another story how in the beginning of the war, Hamas mentioned that Israel shot a rocket into a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 people. That story was spreading like wildfire all over the news, all over the world. A few hours later, Israel released footage that it was a rocket that Hamas launched from within Gaza that hit the hospital. So the Hamas launched a rocket and it only killed 50 people, not 500 people, like they said. But nobody apologized or said that it was fake news. They just kept sharing the story that was shared at once. Same with the number of dead in Gaza, same with the number of babies in Gaza. As horrible as it is, it's not close to the numbers that Hamas are sharing. The Washington Post did actually advertise the correction to that news, and they're saying how you can go to this link and see how they're explaining that the rockets were shot from within Gaza after they researched the footage and they saw that Hamas actually shot the hospital. But once again, once the news is made, once it's sent out, the damage is done. And the lie is out there and nobody comes and apologizes. And sharing this on and on just makes Israel look like the devil when we're just trying to protect our civilians. This is right about all the publications and so many lies being spread. The main thing we're facing is Hamas built a military organization into a civilian city. There are rocket launchers on roofs of houses. They put families and babies in those buildings and shoot rockets at Israel from there, killing Israeli civilians and babies. And what Israel does is they call them up, they warn them that they're going to bomb a specific building, but what they do is stay in that building, put cameras up, and then shoot horrible, very horrible acts. But we also need to protect ourselves. That's the hard part about war. But now let's go deeper into the story and try and understand how all this happened. And one of the main issues is, when do we start telling the story? Because it seems that 50 years is enough, then 100 years, then 200 years. At some point in this clip, I'm going to go way back, when it all started, when all the religion and the Jews and the Muslims all started. But I'm not going to speak about religion from the religious point of view, but more from an historical point of view, and to talk about human psychology and why certain people view the world in a certain way and other people view it in a different way. Anyway, I do want to start 2,000 years ago, and even though it seems way back, I'll explain why. Because in order to understand Israelis and Jews today, you have to understand our history, because it's very rich and very important to us. It's also important to understand why we feel any attachment to this land. And I don't want to say God gave it to us, so it's ours and that's it. That's not the case. But between 1000 to 0 BC, for those 1,000 years, this was a Jewish kingdom. It's all out history. It's in the Bible. It's in the Quran. It also mentions that this was the place of the Jews. There's endless archaeology findings about it. I really hope I don't have to go and try and prove that. There are historians, Josephus Flavius, and also the New Testament. It all mentions it. What we do need to understand is that the whole Jewish religion and tradition was all based and formulated around this area. The names of the places, it's also names we call our children. The holidays are around places in Israel. Our prayers are about this place. When we were exiled 2,000 years ago, the prayers were, one day we're going to be back in Jerusalem and we're going to find ourselves back in home. So it's deep inside the Jewish tradition, the attachment to this place. And a Jew doesn't really feel whole without a connection to this place. Whether you think it's right or not, I understand it's your decision, but I'm still trying to show why there's such an attachment to the place. You also see how difficult it is to really explain what Judaism is, what a Jew is. Is it a religion? Is it a nation? Is it a race? Is it an ideology? But you see how it's all connected. And until you grow up into it, you won't really understand how strong this attachment is. You also see how difficult it is from someone from the outside to understand what Judaism is, or why, if there's a war in Israel, a Jew in New York gets beat up on the street claiming it's connected, that it's something to do about Zionism. But you see, just throughout history, people are always searching for reasons to hate the Jews out in the open. When there isn't a reason, so they hate them inside. But then when there's something to blame, and throughout history there was always something to blame about, then you can say it out in the open and not be condemned about it. You also see throughout history there were contradicting states where Jews were blamed. Once is that they're staying away and not blending into society. And then after a few years, it's because we're blending into society that we're hated. So there's always contradicting reasons. Going back to genocide. Also the claims that we're committing genocide. If we're committing genocide, why are the numbers in Gaza still growing throughout the years? Even now in the war, the population is growing. If we wanted to kill and eradicate all of them, we would have done it a long time ago. We have the means to do it. We're just trying to get rid of the terrorist organization. But since they're blending in civilians, we have no choice in order to just take all the weapon systems out. Also, the civilians get hurt. But also, the whole fact about genocide is a complete lie being spread around the internet. There are also claims about the Jews trying to be colonialists and take over areas. Well, this is something very special about the Jewish nation. Throughout all of history, our number has always been somewhere around between 10 to 13, 14 million. Never expanded and blew up like Islam or Christianity. It was always a little group that just wants a little piece of land to call their home and sit peacefully and quietly. We're not spreading all over the world. We're not claiming a bunch of areas. Just this little homeland we always had. If you look at the map of the size of Israel compared to all the Muslim countries, you can understand what we're talking about. This is about smaller than New Jersey. So in this map, you can see this little red here is Israel, where Jews and Arabs live together. About 8 million Jews and 2 million Arabs, not including Gaza Strip and the West Bank. All the places in green are Muslim populated areas. Islam started from Saudi Arabia and spread to all these countries, and now obviously also Europe and the US in big masses. So if you want to speak about who's colonializing and spreading, it's kind of obvious. Anyway, so that's been happening throughout all history. When the Roman Empire was trying to take over the world and they conquered all those places, when they got to Israel, Israel wouldn't let them be conquered. They wouldn't take their culture. They wouldn't take a different religion. They wanted just to stay in their little piece of land. Eventually, the Romans were able to take over, and they demolished the Hebrew temple and scattered the Jews all over the world, took them as slaves, destroyed Jerusalem completely, and left it in ruins. They changed the name of the area from Israel to Palestine to humiliate the Jews who wouldn't accept the Roman law over them. So since then, this whole area that we call the Middle East, the mostly Israel and Jordan part, this area was called Palestine. Jews were always here. They always lived in small numbers, but they were always here. There's history about it in synagogues in Tiberias and Sfat and in Jerusalem, all over Israel. Also in an area called Tzipoli up in the north. There are always Jews, and it's documented history. And the Jews that went out into exile around the world had the Bible and a prayer book with them. In the prayer book, there's a daily prayer that we say, one day we'll be united in our homeland here in Zion, in Israel, next to Jerusalem. We became a nation that was always chased, ridiculed, pogromed, under attacks and massacres. It was always being the lowest class of society. So about 600 years after the Jews were driven out of this land, starts the Islam. Now, before I start talking about it, I want to say that in every religion or group or method or philosophy, there are a lot of streams in every one of them. Sometimes two streams in the same religion are so contradicting and they disagree on everything that you really can't say that someone understands all religions and all paths and all streams. Also, in all these groups, there are always some that are more extreme or less extreme, more conservative or more liberal, more religious or more secular. And I'm not an expert in Islam, and I don't try to be or think I am. And I don't know all the Muslims in the world, and I don't know what they're all thinking. But as a Jew living in Israel, I personally got to meet a lot of Muslim Arabs in my life, from childhood till these days. I grew up next to them. I did business with them. I was in the army with a few. I played music with a few. Arab contractor with his workers renovated my house. And I got to know a lot of them and talked to a lot of them. And I want to share my experience by knowing them and hearing from them. I'm sure you might know a lot of beautiful, peaceful, moderate Muslims in your area. I know a lot. But there's also a stream in Islam that you really should be concerned about because it's in your backyard and they're changing the world. and we should know about it. And I got to know about them by the, let's say, more moderate, more secular people who grew up into Islam, which I got to meet in my life, and I'm hearing stories about the radical Islam from them. So it's a Muslim telling me about other Muslims. And they, the secular Muslims, or the people that grew up Muslims but don't really practice religion, they are terrified of the radical Islam much more than the rest of us. And I know in places of the West, especially in the US, you're so scared of racial profiling not to hurt people's feelings. So I can tell you this, that the Muslims I know would way rather be insulted by being stopped at an airport and asked about what they're doing there than letting an extreme Muslim pass by. So they're the Muslims that are, let's say, Muslims by tradition. They were born into it. They don't really practice religion. And they kind of like celebrate it as a culture, like a person who doesn't really believe in Christianity, but they celebrate Christmas. So it's kind of their tradition. They do the holidays, they do the blessings, but they don't really care about it too much. Those are the ones I got to know in my life and connected with. And what I heard from them about Islam is this. So at about 600 AD came Muhammad. Again, I don't know anything about him. I don't know his teachings, I don't know who he was, and I don't have complaints about him. But different people interpret his teachings in different ways. Maybe some do see it as something peaceful, but some see it as something very opposite, very violent, and very scary. So those people say that, first of all, Judaism and Christianity had their chance, but he is the last prophet to have a revelation from God. Nobody will come after him. If somebody comes after him and claims that he is also a prophet and had a revelation, so he's lying and you should kill him. And all the other religions, meaning Judaism and Christianity, they're not relevant anymore. He updated them, and now everybody has to convert to Islam, to his religion. This is already a bad start. He also says that eventually the whole world will be Islam.
This is the correct religion. This is the religion that all of humanity needs to be upon, of Islam. And we will not stop until it enters every home. So I want you to repeat after me. I want to hear it in every single district. It should tremble. Brooklyn should hear it. The Bronx should hear it. Queens should hear it. Say it as if the Ummah depends on this, my brothers and sisters. La ilaha illallah.
He also says that eventually the whole world will be Islam. Whoever won't be will be an infidel, mainly the Jews and Christians. And that's in the base of every believer in Islam. So there's no legitimacy to be anything but a Muslim. You can either convert or be killed or run away, or you can pay your jizya tax, which means it's like a protection tax that you won't be killed. But first of all, it's a humiliating ceremony. You pay your tax and you get slapped. And you're a second-class citizen. You don't get a lot of rights as a practicing Muslim does.
When Muslims go and conquer the adjacent country, what do? We kill them all? No. The Prophet says, the first thing you do is call them to Islam. If they refuse, then tell them Allah obliged upon you to pay taxation. In return, when enemy comes and attack your country, you don't fight. We Muslims protect you. Subhanallah, for this little money? Yes. And you enjoy sitting in your homes and in your country and live your life normally. But the ruling is for Sharia. So you do not open nightclubs, you do not fornicate. If they refuse, then we have to fight. And if we fight you, then we capture you, you become our slaves, and we take your land, and you take because you refuse. I give you two good options in the coming 40, 50 years when the Muslims become strong as they're supposed to be.
And that's the general plan, that one day they're going to cover the whole earth. And there's some people that are more passive about it, and some that are more active about it. They're the quieter ones, the moderate ones that just blend into society and practice the laws of Islam in their own home, but understand that one day it's going to happen. And then there's the people that are more active, what they call the jihad, the holy war, that they're taking over the world. And it can be in a nonviolent way where they immigrate, become citizens. They have a lot of children. That's part of their teachings, to have a lot of children so they can overpopulate. They get into politics, they get into local municipality, into education boards, and then they can make new rules and get voted in and new orders and gradually turn places to be places of Islam. You can see it in England, in Scandinavia, in France. It's in Germany now, and you don't understand what we're dealing with here in Israel. This is the main thing. We're judging them by Western eyes, by Western morals. When we observe them, we try to think of them as the way we look at the world, that they look at the world. You don't understand how they're born into like a completely different reality. It's like that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, that we can't understand each other. We don't understand how us and them are from completely different universes. We interpret everything differently. And this is what the West doesn't understand. They're trying to play by Western rules with the Muslim society that have, it makes them laugh the way we look at the world. And then there's the violent jihad, that they have terrorist attacks, they force people to convert, and they kill. It started in Saudi Arabia and it's spread all over the Middle East and now Europe and the world. And it's very concerning because their numbers are growing rapidly, also because they encourage a lot of reproducing.
Interview of a Muslim in Canada with a reporter.
One day we can have a Muslim majority nation here in Canada, right in your face.
We have Canadian law here, and you say that you want Sharia law to displace Canadian law. That doesn't sound very respectful.
In majority, you wouldn't have any other option. You would go to your queen and tell her to change the laws.
Change the laws to what, sir? To Sharia law?
No, change the laws to not allow any more Muslims to come to Canada. We owe our allegiance and our loyalty first and foremost to our religion, not to the queen, to be honest. When I went for my so-called oath, I was silent, I didn't say anything. It was your responsibility to make sure you got it out of me. So when I didn't say anything, I'm not liable to anything.
They believe that the whole world is theirs, period. The whole land is theirs. There's just places that they haven't claimed yet. But as you can see now, that it's happening in the US too. We also don't understand how deep, and religion is everything for them. It's not like I'm a person, I live my life, I go to work, I have my family, and religion is something for me to lean on, something to fill my heart, something to give me strength. For them, it starts and ends in religion. And this whole life is just something we have to get through so we can go to heaven. And the quicker we can go to heaven, the better. But you're not allowed to kill yourself. But if you die for that cause, you become a martyr and you get a great place in heaven with the 70 virgins and so on.
Martyrdom is a hugely important concept here in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're currently at an event where hundreds of women hold their babies into the air to show that they're willing to offer their children as martyrs for God and for Imam Hussein. All of that goes back to the legendary Battle of Karbala, where Imam Hussein held his baby into the air, asking the enemy that was besieging Karbala to give the baby water, and instead the enemy killed the baby. Now, there's nothing more glorious here than dying as a martyr.
Also, if they immigrate to a different country, the laws of that country are a joke to them, because the only laws they care about are the laws of the religion. When they're enforced by a certain local law, it's just funny to them. If they're still in small numbers, they remain quiet and try and obey. But once they're in big numbers, they just make up their own rules. Here's a clip from New York, for instance.
These Muslim community patrols just began operating in Brooklyn this year, with members dressed like police officers and driving cars identical to police squad cars. Even other Muslims have raised questions about the need for the patrols, with residents expressing fears this is just another form of Sharia law enforcement. Area. Others denounce residents for drinking, claiming this is a Muslim area and alcohol is not permitted.
Yeah, alcohol is permitted, and there's no such thing as a Muslim area. There's no such thing. There might be an area where more Muslims live. There might be an area where more Christians live, or more Jews live, or more Sikhs live, or more Indians live, or something like that. But you can't have different laws in those areas. The fact that they are allowed to have cars that look like police cars is completely insane. And the question is, are they there to defend the Muslim community, which, by the way, would be the job of the police in the first place. The police are not very good at defending the Jewish community, but it is the job of the police to defend all communities, period. It's the job of the police to defend the individual. But do you think these guys, how do you think these guys, if you're a Muslim patrol guy, you're driving around and you see a couple people, Muslim guys, drinking on the street, what are you going to do? And what authorization do you have to do anything? So this is just another escalation of a failed city, and I'm just telling you, people, get the out of there.
They just force their own rules on that area. They don't care that there's laws of New York, and I don't know what their numbers are in that area, but if the police try and get in there, they just won't let them in. That's what Sweden are going through, that there are whole areas that the police are just afraid to go in. There's nothing you can do. And there's so many cases of rape reported in Sweden, in London, that they're just, young women are afraid to walk around alone, because rape, as appalling as it is, it's part of the culture. It's okay to do, to treat women in that way. Just search Google or YouTube for rape in European countries by Muslim immigrants. Here's a article. I left the URL above. You can go check it out. It's horrible, and they just don't know what to do with it. They can't fight it. It's part of their culture, and they really don't know what to do against it. There's something that in the West, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you agree or not, the basic values or morals are according to Christianity and Jesus. It's grace, it's giving, it's compassion, it's giving up, turning the other cheek. Even though you don't always do it, these are still the values that conduct the West. And in Islam, by Muhammad, he was a man of war. There was rape, there was beheading. That's why in the Islam, or in the West, war is, if you don't have a choice, there's nothing you do, you go to war. But you have to understand how in the Middle East, war is a way of expression. If you're not at war with me, you're either afraid I'm going to win and you're afraid you're going to lose, but every so often you have to go to war for self-expression. It defines who you are. Also in the West, so we go to war in reality TV shows or who builds the biggest business. But by Islam, it's always violence, it's always killing. Because again, death is just a transition to the next life to go to heaven. And if you do it in the name of Islam, that's even better. It's a shortcut into heaven. Here's a clip of an Israeli reporter that knows Arabic that went into Europe, and here's what they had to say to him.
What can my enemies do to me? If they lock me up, I have Jannah, paradise in my heart. If they kill me, I become shaheed, inshallah. And if they ban me out of this land, I see it as a travel. I travel the world of Allah, so I explore the world of Allah. What can the enemies do to me? They can do nothing.
Threatening to come and get me, is that what you're saying? I'm saying that the Sharia would be implemented in the whole world.
Sharia is
that's what you want. You want.
Thank you. You answered my question. You want a worldwide Islamic caliphate.
Of course we do.
And I'm going to be delivering a lecture, inshallah, here about the methodology to overthrow the regimes and to implement the Sharia, which is an obligation upon us. I come from England in order to radicalize the youth in this country. Takbir! Allah! So we say in Europe one day we will become the majority. And at that time we will take the authority, inshallah, implement the Sharia, and will be a mercy for them and a mercy for us as well. Okay? Are you happy with that? very happy.
A good Muslim is when he's in jail or he's on his way to jail. That's a good Muslim.
That the Sharia has to be in place in every country in the whole world, even though they dislike it. This is clear. It will happen. We have proof from out of Quran and Sunnah that Islam will dominate the whole world, from the east till the west, and from the west till the east.
Here, the kuffar is going to pay jizya?
Inshallah, yes. Or they can embrace Islam. You know, the Sharia could come.
And the queen will have a hijab?
I think the queen will be tried for the crime she committed. The point is that the Sharia could come here in one of four ways. Either by the foreign policy of the Islamic State to annex it, or the Muslims here, or the people would embrace Islam themselves and they will implement it themselves, or there could be some kind of coup, as happened in Medina in the first Islamic State, that the people in charge or the people in the military could take power. Or we could have a Bosnia type scenario. If they fight the Muslims, civil war, if they continue down the line that they're going down the road and they continue to provoke the Muslims, I think it could kick off over here. We could end up in a position where we're fighting here in jihad itself, and we could end up in authority. Allah asked me to speak. Not because
they don't like this
if they don't like it, then they can go.
There was a famous story in the Quran where Muhammad and his followers started spreading and converting people into Islam. And when they met the Jews, they wouldn't accept Islam. And at that time, what I understand, again, this is what Muslims tell me about this story, is that they saw they couldn't beat the Jews, so they signed a peace agreement with them. Once they got strong enough, they went and they killed all of them. And raped the women, beheaded the children, whatever. And a lot of the Islam culture today base everything, the wars, their plans, on that story. And that's why when you saw them in October 7th, killing Jews, raping women in those clips, you see them so ecstatic. Because to them, they were fulfilling the meaning of life. And also to them, because of that story, that there was a deception there. They signed the peace agreement knowing they're going to break it, knowing they're going to lie. Today, if in the Islam, if you don't lie in the war, if you don't put deception in there, it's like you were a wuss. You didn't really win. You have to win through deceiving the enemy, through lying. That's why you see around the world, whether it's Iraq with the nuclear agreements or the Hamas with Israel, they always break the peace agreements, because to them, war is until the death. So if you sign a peace agreement, it shows that you're weak. Why wouldn't you want to keep killing if you can? So if you're signing a peace agreement, it means you're too weak. That's why they sign it and break it. Sign it and break it, knowing in advance that they're going to break it. That's why we don't understand in somewhat the West. We always try to be honest, always try to tell the truth. But in the Islam, lying is part of it. So all the news, all the fake news, all the lies, and also Al Jazeera and BBC that is completely pro-Muslim, they're constantly spreading lies. They're all over Europe, all over America, spreading and building their religion. Their plan is to take over all of the Western world and spread the Sharia law there. Going back to that same famous battle, since the Jews wouldn't accept the Islam on them, and Muhammad waged war against them and won, since then they made them second-class citizens. The Jews weren't allowed to own land, they weren't allowed to ride horses, and they couldn't carry weapons. Which, by the way, this is the whole issue of the war today in Israel. The Jews own land, they have their own army, they ride horses. This is why it all started. It was never about geography. It's about Jews doing things that the Quran won't accept. And for a Muslim, it's so humiliating. It's like there's a bug in the plan. If the Jews get away with owning land, riding horses, and carrying weapons, so they must be stopped. Otherwise, the prophecy of the Quran won't be true. There's also a famous book by Mark Twain, who visited the Holy Land in 1867. He wrote a book of his experiences here. He wasn't pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. That whole myth didn't exist back then. And he describes how this whole piece of land was almost unlivable due to how run down it was and full of diseases like malaria. And he'd go for miles and miles and hours without seeing anyone. And when he started seeing people, it was always Arabs and Jews. They always were around. When Jews started coming to Israel, they just wanted a place to live. They started buying cheap land they could find in legal ways.
There's this reference to Mark Twain with regard to Palestine that kept coming up, and it piqued my interest. It seemed like such an oddity that I felt the need to look into it. I thought, maybe he can help. So I purchased a copy of The Innocents Abroad. It's one of Mark Twain's non-fiction works, and it's a book of his travel writings from his trips to Europe and the Middle East. 120 pages worth of this book take place during Mark Twain's time exploring Palestine, and as it happens, he was there in the year 1869. I mention the year because the Zionist movement, or the push for Jews to populate the Holy Land, that didn't happen until the year 1881. So Mark Twain is eyewitness to Palestine prior to the State of Israel, which puts him in a pretty good position to tell who was there and what the place was like. Mark Twain visited all the famous biblical sites: Galilee, Capernaum, Tiberias, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Jericho, Shechem. And according to the author, Palestine in the 19th century was not a thriving or bustling or flourishing territory. The first thing you notice in his writing was that the places were dreary. It was dreary and run down, and there was very little cultivation of the land. Here's how he describes the landscape. Hardly any trees, grass, or flowers. It was mostly barren rocky hills and flat burning deserts. There were some crumbling Roman ruins and occasionally beautiful mosques and Catholic churches, but the vast majority of the geography and the infrastructure was lifeless and unimpressive, especially compared with the spectacular Bible stories associated with the land. Now, what about the people Mark Twain encountered? Well, one of the more striking details of his account was how few people they saw at times. There were long stretches of travel in which they saw hardly anyone at all. Maybe a handful of Arabs or Bedouin goat herders, or sometimes nobody. So the word desolation occurs so often in Mark Twain's writing because so much of the land was just emptiness. But there were some densely populated towns and villages where he witnessed a great deal of poverty and squalor and disease. One of the descriptors that the author uses is squalid humanity. His words, not mine. But he saw a lot of Arabs with wounds and sores and disabilities, and he watched malnourished kids walking around with their faces covered in flies. And unsurprisingly, it was not a happy, friendly place. Spots like Tiberias and Jerusalem, there were mobs of aggressive beggars who would block his path and yell at him until he paid them or tipped them something. In fact, these places were so unpleasant that Mark Twain said it felt like he was back in biblical times. It was reminiscent of the ancient world. So the implication is that Palestine in the 19th century, under the administration of the Ottoman Turks, was just not a very coveted or desirable place. And what's more, at no point is any group of people referred to as Palestinians. There's plenty of mention of Arabs, Jews, Bedouins, Catholics. Never is the label Palestinian used. I think that informs the question as to who was the first to arrive in the land. I'm willing to revise my opinion here, but at this point in time, I think Mark Twain was a credible primary source. He didn't have a reputation for being a liar. There's no evidence he was biased toward the State of Israel because it didn't exist. And there were other writers from that period who also attested to the same sorts of things. There's another author who's useful here, and it's an historian called Abram Socker. Abram Socker wrote a book called A History of the Jews, which seems to corroborate Mark Twain's observations. Socker's book contains the explanation for how the Zionist immigrants converted Palestine into a modern and highly civilized commonwealth. He makes the case that the increase in Jews correlated with an increase in Arabs, and all of which began to enjoy a higher standard of living. Meanwhile, in the surrounding countries, the Arab population and the Arab well-being seemed to remain static. First of all, the soil there was parched and diseased, and the Jewish settlers had to nurse it back to health. Only then could they cultivate orchards, vineyards, almond plantations, wheat fields. They used the Jordan River for irrigation, and they tapped the Dead Sea for minerals, which up until that point had to be imported. For a long time, amoebic dysentery and tuberculosis had been a problem in the Arab villages, but Jewish people brought modern medicine, and they built hospitals and nurseries, and they improved health standards all around. Also, the Jews built infrastructure. They created thriving towns like Haifa and Tel Aviv, places that were previously just sand dunes and swamps. And they did all that while being violently opposed by Arabs and stifled by the British. There's no question that both Jews and Palestinians have some historical claim to the land, but I think it's important to mention that the Zionist Jewish immigrants were not colonizers. They were pioneers, and they added value to the place, and they created a pretty good society there.
And here's a famous map. I also really recommend you check out Dr. Einat Wilf. This is from her X account. You can follow this link. This is the partition plan that was offered. The blue was offered to the Jews. The yellow was offered to the Muslims on how to split the land. And if you look at this map on the right, it shows the places that were infected with malaria that were unlivable. That's what basically was offered to the Jews. But they still took it because they just wanted a small piece of land to live. And through the technology and science they knew back then, they cleared the areas out of malaria and made those places livable and brought technology and all their experience to create work and jobs in agriculture. And there was a huge migration of Arab population to come work in those areas. So those spaces were basically vacant before the Jews made them livable. So with the destruction of the temple, the Jews were driven out of this land. A few stayed, but in little groups scattered over Israel. Jews were spread over the world. And this area, that its name was changed to Palestine, was always reconquered by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Crusaders, the Muslims, the Mamlukim, the Ottomans, then the British. And the British are basically the ones who offer the partition plan between the Jews living here and the Muslims living here. There was always proof of Jews living here these whole times, small numbers, but they were still here. And around the world, Jews were always a chaste nation, always going through massacres, terror attacks, killings, basically trying to just lower their heads and not get killed. It got so bad around the world during the late 1800s, Europe and the Middle East, that the Jews then in Europe came up with that idea of Zionism, that we deserve our own home. They tried to think where it can happen, and a few places were offered. But in the end, they all agreed on this part of land in Palestine because we feel a natural and historical connection to this place. Plus, it's very vacant, like we heard in that clip. There was a lot of open land, unlivable, and they started coming and legally buying land from people who sold it. There's this picture, this story being told how this land was called Palestine, that it was the official name of the country, and it had a flag, and there were a Palestinian nation living here. And one day the evil Jews came from Europe and just ran in here with a bunch of weapons and started kicking all the Arabs out of their homes. And it's such a false picture because we are talking about over 100 years ago, no borders. Nothing is clear of what's going on here. There's a strip of land, which today consists of Israel and Jordan. This area was called Palestine, no matter who controlled it for the last 2,000 years, and a bunch of little groups and tribes lived here. Like I said, Druze, Muslim Arabs, Christian Arabs, Jews. But in the late 1800s, it was after a 400-year rule of the Turkish Empire or the Ottoman Empire. There was no passport control or anything like that. Jews started coming because they were chaste, and rumor started developing in the world, that the Jews are starting to gather in Israel. There was a bunch of vacant land till today. So when the Jews were arriving, they didn't kick anybody out of their homes. They bought vacant lands that were unlivable and made a home for themselves. But what we mentioned before, for the Muslim, the fact that a Jew owns land, that's impossible to understand. And then all the known massacres started against the Jews. There was one in 1920, one in 1928, big massacres, and except for that, they constantly kept attacking them. But as it was happening and more Jews coming, they started gathering and protecting themselves, and they started acquiring horses and weapons and fighting back. And this was even more unheard of for this to happen, that Jews have weapons, horses, and land, and it became a spiritual, religious war of trying to correct the situation, as it says in the Quran, because a Jew getting stronger is unaccepted in Islam. And that kept getting worse. But again, it's important to understand that this war wasn't about geography. In the beginning of in 1948, there were less than 2 million people living here. Today, 10 million people live here, and there's still plenty of empty space. It's not about room. They say that comfortably in this area, 15 million people can live here easily. Then it'll be about the population density of Holland. And with right planning, you can get to 25, 30 million people living here. There's plenty of vacant land for this to happen. And there's the whole Negev, the desert, that nobody wanted to live here until the Jews came and started putting cities up together. It was unlivable until we came here. So again, it's not about space, it's about the fact that the Jews have their own land. That's why all the peace agreements we tried to have with them, it never worked, because it doesn't matter what we sign. It's unacceptable for the Muslims that the Jews have their own country. By the way, it's anywhere in the world. Even if what happened in a different place, eventually they'd come to it and start attacking it. Now, as we were saying, there are all kinds of Muslims. Some are more secular or more religious or more extreme or less extreme. And they always follow the head of the tribe, his ideology. And in Israel, there were tribes of Muslims that welcomed the presence of the Jews and worked together with them and enjoyed mutual living and an opportunity to do business together. And it's still like that till today. Those are the Arabs that live in Israel, have Israeli passports, Israeli IDs. They have complete equal rights here living with us. The more religious that wouldn't have that happen kept attacking and even signed agreements with the Nazis. There was the famous Islamic ruler here who partnered with Hitler, and they agreed that he's going to keep doing the job here. Haj Amin al-Husseini was the Grand Mufti here, was invited to Germany many times and collaborated with Hitler in exterminating the Jews. And all the tribes following his rule are the people that started massacring and killing Jews in Israel. Then in 1947, the UN gave Israel permission, established the land of Israel here in the land they got from the UN partition plan, which obviously was against the Jews in the size of the place. Also, all of Jordan was cut off of this area called Palestine and was given to those parts of the Palestinians that were living beyond the river, were given to them by Britain, and they were called the Jordanians from then on. So in this strip of land were left the Muslim tribes and the Jews, and the UN partitioned the land for them. In 1948, when the Jews declared the State of Israel, then the local Arab tribes started attacking them. That was the War of Independence of Israel. And against all odds, we won. And before that, I also recommend checking out Yusuf Haddad, an Israeli Arab, who tells a story of his grandfather that they were told by the surrounding Muslim countries to leave their homes so they could bomb and attack all the Jewish population here. And the Jews said, whoever doesn't run away and collaborates with us will live freely and peacefully and equally to us. And those are the descendants of them are the Arabs living here in peace in Israel today. So I really recommend checking Yusuf Haddad. He tells that whole story. He's a great YouTuber and influencer, an Arab that lives here, and he's pro-Israel. So a lot of the Muslims fled and then started the War of Independence. At those times, at that war, the Jews did take over Palestinian lands because it was a war that they started. And that's what happens in a war. If you attack, you lose territory. But it's not that Jews initiated any colonization or kicking Muslims out of that land out of nowhere. Name a city, name an Arab city that was cleared out by Jews, not during a war that they didn't start. So now it's just a horrible situation that the Jews are blamed for taking over the land, which they didn't. We try to reach many peace agreements with them, but like we said, it doesn't interest them, not peace and not a place to live, because there's still plenty of room here. The fact that the Jews have a state called their own is unacceptable by Islam. They will never recognize a Jewish state. And they say it themselves. It's in the Hamas charter and everything. So everything we said till now is on the web already. There are people that explain it much better than me and much deeper than what I do. And let's see how this all started, how we got to this horrible situation, and what we could probably do better to get out of it. Let's start with Abraham, how it all basically began there. And I'm relying on quotes by the Rambam, which in English is called Maimonides, if I'm not mistaken, and Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag, also known as Baal Sulam, or the owner of the ladder. They're not only Jewish rabbis and spiritual leaders, they were also Kabbalists. And let's understand what the difference is between a Kabbalist to a different spiritual teacher. Kabbalah isn't religion or a faith, but it's a spiritual science. For example, there's a famous argument whether God exists or not. And the Kabbalists say this whole argument is irrelevant. We're not arguing around the right point. Because in Kabbalah, they say that God or the Creator is nature. The force of nature, that is the Creator. Because if we look at nature, nature is creating us right now. So that force of nature, that includes all the forces of nature, the general force that constantly creates, that is the Creator, because that is what it's doing. Kabbalah also defines that Creator as the quality of bestowal. There's a quality in nature that constantly gives and gives and gives, like gravity. It just keeps working. It never stops. That quality in nature that is creating it, that is the Creator. So whether it exists or not, it's irrelevant. It exists. You can argue whether that force has thought, whether it has a plan, whether it has a personality. That's a different argument. But the fact that there is a Creator that is creating us right now, that's that upper force, that higher force. That force is the cause, and we are the result. We are the effect, the consequence. And Kabbalists just give us a few guiding questions if we want to go into that. If that force is creating us, how can it be that we're smarter than it? If Picasso is drawing a painting, how can the painting be smarter than him? If that force of nature is the reason and we are the result, so how could we be in somewhat higher than that force? It has to be in somewhat above us. Also, we see in nature that nature has plans in it. When you plant a seed in the ground, so it grows into a tree, there's like a plan in the DNA. When the sperm meets the egg, there's a plan that makes it develop into a person. So if there are little plans in nature, isn't it okay to think that maybe nature as a whole also has a plan to it? Also, science has also proven that all of existence is like one big energy. And the difference between like you and me is that that energy is more compressed in some areas than other, but it's all basically like this one big soup that we all exist in. So if there are little points of consciousness in that big soup, so maybe altogether it's a big one conscious. So those are a few things to think about. But basically what Kabbalists say, that if we observe nature and we learn the rules that conduct it and how to be in balance with those rules, we'll learn them, we'll research them, we'll know them, we'll feel good. For instance, if I don't know the rules of gravity and I fall off a cliff, I'll feel bad. If I know the rules of gravity and I'll get into balance with them, I'll feel them as good. Or the nature rules of electricity. If I know how it works, I can use my AC, I can turn on the lights. If I don't know how electricity works, I can get electrocuted. So it's all about keeping balance with the laws of nature, with the Creator. And those laws work on my internality too, my thoughts, my desires, my feelings. It's all part of the first forces of nature. If I learn how to get into balance with them, I'll feel the inner balance, the wholeness that is in nature. A Kabbalist is a person who learns how to bring his inner self into balance with the forces of nature. And then he can discover more elements, more layers in nature. That is called spiritual attainment. There's an example of like a radio, a transistor, that there's radio waves all over here around in the air. But if I'm not tuned into them, I'm not aware of it. If I have a transistor and I can tune it into the waves around me, I can hear them. So Kabbalists say, if I tune my heart to this force of bestowal around me, I'll start seeing deeper levels in it. So that's how Kabbalists tell us that this force does have a thought, does have a plan. And that's what I want to talk about, that plan that the Kabbalists tell us about, which is all the script, the story of humanity that we're seeing before us right now. So Abraham was actually the first Kabbalist that discovered that there's this one force of nature, the power of bestowal, conducting everything. And by getting tuned into it and getting spiritual revelations, he actually wrote a book called the Book of Creation, Sefer Yetzirah, where he describes that same force and the rules that conduct it with the 10 Sfirot. Very interesting. You should look into it. And one of the first things he tells us about, the first things that a Kabbalist get in spiritual attainment when coming into balance with nature is that all of humanity, all people on the earth are connected like cells in one organism, connected in the hearts. We can't see it, but we can feel it. We can feel compassion. We can feel the interaction between us. There's a lot of scientific research about it too. This is something he discovered 4,000 years ago. And at some point in history, he was a witness of something very unique, which we describe as the Tower of Babylon. That what actually that story describes is that there was an outburst of ego in humanity, that perfect organism of cells that was living in harmony, suddenly there was a big outburst of ego, and that's described in the Bible as when people couldn't talk to each other anymore. They started disagreeing and not able to live together. The ego started developing. And another thing a Kabbalist attains, that just like in every cell in a body, there's the cell itself, but also the nucleus inside, which gives it the information how to connect to the other points, the other cells in the body. Also in every person, there is his ego that wraps him around and he feels individual, but there's also a part inside called the point in the heart, or the root of the soul, that does give you a point of the ability to see the other, to have compassion, to connect like cells in a body. So in that outburst of the ego, what he did, he started teaching it, and he collected around himself people that point in the heart, that point inside that does search for meaning and how we got here and who we are and how to connect, that point of connection. He gathered those people together, and they started using his rules and attainment to create that net of connection. That if the whole body was an organism, that the ego outbursts, that everyone thinks of themselves like a body with cancer, he basically created this method of love will cover all crimes. Let's keep our points in the heart, the point of connection together, above the egos that are outbursting. By creating that connection between them, they were able to balance themselves with nature. And it was a group that came into spiritual attainment because of their tendency being directed towards that upper force, towards God. They called themselves straight to God, or Yashar El, Israel. That's how that group was formulated. That group, it had nothing to do with passports or who you were born to. It wasn't any nation. It was just people that agreed to choose connection over separation, thus coming into balance with nature and discovering the higher force in nature, or the light, as they call it. That's why they also call themselves being light to the nations, that through the light they could spread, it would touch more people and gather more and more people to them. And that group kept growing and growing. But part of the development of the script is also the ego getting stronger, and those people who want to connect have to balance the outburst of ego every time, balance it and keep balancing it. That's why there were a lot of breakings in that group that kept sending them into exile. For instance, Egypt and Babylon. And every time people who agree and want to unite have to gather and unite above the egos. That's how they bring that whole organism into balance. The more the ego grows in humanity, the more we have to connect above it and balance that part. Because it's not, the purpose isn't to get rid of the ego, it's just to keep bringing it into balance and connection. So throughout all of history, a person who that point of connection, the root of his soul, woke up in him and started asking questions of the meaning of life and what we're doing here, at some point that yearning brings him to these studies, to know the art of interconnection between people, of coming into spiritual balance with nature. From those inner practicings, also external rituals, customs, traditions started evolving out of them. That's how Judaism was formed around the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is called the internality of the Torah, and Judaism is the externality of the Torah, practicing its corporeal deeds. And from Judaism came Christianity and Islam and so on. But throughout history, a lot of people mixing with egos lost the inner connection to the essence of spiritual paths, and religion started getting distorted and moving away from that, from the source, from that beautiful inner balance and love and connection that they actually started from. And today we see that religions got so distorted and twisted in all kinds of ways, like people calling for death of others or killing in the name of the Lord. It had nothing to do with how they all started. And according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, again, Israel isn't about a passport or who you were born to. If you feel you have that point inside that is searching for meaning and essence and connection with others, you are called Israel according to the definitions of the Kabbalah. But throughout history, in keeping the tradition, it turned out that the biggest mass of people with points of the heart are here in this land of Israel. And what this time is calling of us, and also all the other peoples of the world who hear this, who are relating to these words, is to connect above all differences. Love will cover all crimes. We also see that right before the 7th of October, the state of Israel was in the biggest separation they were ever in history. And it comes as a result because the ego part of the body is demanding, the script, the plan is demanding the people with the points in the heart to unite above the differences, to balance that organism in nature. So that's the call of the time. That's what it means to be light to the nations, to bring the light, to bring that balance. War we see doesn't work. Also, peace talks we see don't work because we're not demanded to work in front of the egos. What is needed is that all people who feel this need of connection, to connect between them. There's a whole method on how to do it. You're invited to contact me or look into it and balance that part of nature that is what nature is demanding of us right now. That's how this whole organism of humanity can reach peace and harmony.